All right, I think we'll go ahead and get started here. So good evening, everyone. My name is Andrew Strope. I'm the Chief Strategy and Planning Officer with IPS. Thank you so much for joining us this evening for this Transportation Town Hall, where we will focus on both Indigo and walk zone recommendations heading into the 21-22 school year. I have members of both the Indigo as well as IPS team with you this evening to go through some information as well as to answer some questions. Just a quick note on slide 2 here before we get rolling. This session is being translated in real time for our Spanish-speaking families. To access the Spanish version, please click on the interpretation button, which you can find at the bottom of your Zoom screen, and choose Spanish. In addition, you can find the Spanish version of this slide deck in the chat window. So this evening, we are going to cover 3 things. The first is we will walk through and understand the current state of IPS transportation operations. Then we will explicitly hit 2 recommendations that we'll be making for the 21-22 school year. And that is walk zones and Indigo. And just a quick note, these are initiatives that have been at play in the organization in some form or fashion for the past number of years. From an Indigo perspective, we started a pilot 3 years ago with Indigo, where our high school students were able to transition to Indigo, and we have executed over 150,000 rides. And then from a walk zone perspective, we've had a board policy since 1998 that have established walk zones, and a number of our K-12 families and schools have been utilizing those walk zones over the past number of years. And then we will finish off this evening with some Q&A. So if you have questions and answers, there's a Q&A section. Please lift those up. We also will be lifting up questions from some feedback forms that we've had live on the website for the past few weeks. And so I'll do a collection of Q&A questions that we're seeing both live as well as ones that we've received online up to this point. So to start off, do want to organize the conversation into the IPS 2025 strategic plan, where we have 5 key values that we will be talking about more and more as an organization as we head into the future. Those 5 values or core values are students first, racial equity, continuous improvement, integrity, and community. And then as we think about our strategic priorities over the next 5 years, one of those is to operate and fund strategically. And so there's an explicit initiative around how we think about revenue generation and fiscal sustainability that directly aligns to the conversation we are having this evening. And so now I'll turn it over to Superintendent Johnson to walk us through some of that historical and current context. Superintendent Johnson.
Great, thank you, Andrew. Good evening, everyone. Thanks for being with us and taking some time to learn more this evening about the recommendations that we'll be bringing to the Board of School Commissioners. Andrew teed us up a little bit in just the last slide that he was talking about. We've spent a lot of time over this past year specifically talking about our budget and our priorities as we head into the spring and think about next year. If you've looked at any of the news about the district, it's probably something you've heard about, that we have had a pretty significant budget impact as a result of COVID, to the tune of about $15 million in terms of budget gap for this current school year and $18 million as we head into next year. And there are some things that we're really thankful for that we know we have working in our favor. One, a number of resources coming to us from the federal government in the form of the federal stimulus that the education sector and school districts across the country are going to be receiving over the next several months. Very thankful for those dollars, but we know that's a one-time infusion of funding that's to help us recover from COVID-19 and ensure we are meeting the needs our students have. And we know those dollars will run out after a certain amount of time. So they aren't resources we can use to fill a fiscal gap that we're facing year over year. So we're excited for those dollars, but we know they won't be enough to solve all the concerns we have about having a sustainable financial future. And so there's a a reality that we have to recognize and that we've been talking about as a team is we have to make decisions sooner rather than later that will help us stabilize our long-term financial viability. And the sooner we can act, the better our chances are that we keep ourselves at that purple line that you can see on the screen. And that's what happens if we stay stable and make decisions now, and keep us from the orange line, which would mean our resources are continuing to decrease and we find ourselves with a pretty unsustainable budget deficit. So if you think about what we're trying to accomplish, we're trying to accomplish staying at that purple line and remaining stable, and doing it in such a way that the trade-offs we make and the decisions we make are as far away as they can be from teaching and learning in our classrooms. So we're working hard to make strategic decisions. Strategic doesn't mean easy. Strategic doesn't mean there aren't trade-offs, but it does mean we're going to prioritize teaching and learning in our classrooms and look for areas and places where we can make shifts and changes that won't negatively impact teaching and learning to the extent possible. So that's why we've looked at transportation. We've been looking at transportation over the last few years because we know our transportation costs as a district are higher than what you would find for similarly sized districts or districts around us. And there are a few reasons for that. One, as IPS families are aware, we're a pretty high choice district. So families can choose from a number of schools to attend across the district, and we provide transportation to all those places. Second, we believe in school level autonomy. And so there are some schools who've had decision-making rights in terms of the length of their school day or what time the day starts and what time the day ends. That adds to the cost for transportation. Third, over time, there have been family requests made for exemptions or exceptions to policies. And in many cases, we've honored those. And over time, those have just gotten baked into our transportation costs. And so there's some course correction we need to do to be sure that we're, to the extent possible, honoring the policies that we already have in place and making sure those are being applied across the board. And then the geography of Indianapolis. If you look at it and think about the shape of the IPS district, it goes pretty far east-west and pretty far north-south. And so we're covering a lot of ground every day with our buses and with our school buses to be sure our kids can make it to and from school safely. Now, prior to the recommendation we're making that you'll learn more about this evening, there have been a number of things we've done to address transportation costs. So everything from fuel-efficient propane buses to reduce costs of gas, to changing our school bell structures to help us with pairing school buses together, changes in our after-school and extracurricular bus structure, as well as outsourcing our transportation to a different partner corporation called First Student last year. All of those things in service of ensuring we can get those costs down and be sure those things aren't negatively, again, impacting and making us have to make shifts in our schools, our school buildings, but looking at those things outside of our school buildings that we can manage more closely. So those are some of the things we've done up until this point. So now we've reached the point where we want to make this next recommendation around transportation shifts for our student body. So I'm going to turn it over to Zach Mulholland. He is our Executive Director of Operations to talk about those recommendations. Zach?
Great. Thank you, Superintendent. Before I get started, I want to remind everyone, as Andrew previously mentioned, if you have any questions as we walk through the presentation, please type those in the Q&A function or feature that you'll see at the bottom of your screen. We have a staff that's working behind the scenes that'll gather and organize those questions for us to answer at the end of the presentation. So as Superintendent Johnson indicated, the IPS team is looking at our transportation services and recommendations with respect to the 21-22 school year. So primarily those efforts and initiatives fall into three categories. One with respect to IndyGo, and so as Superintendent Johnson indicated and Andrew outlined, we've had a 3-year pilot program partnership with IndyGo. And so we're looking at exploring what the next iteration, what the next step in that partnership involves. And so will involve identifying and shifting some of our IPS high school students off of a yellow bus and onto the IndyGo transit network. We're looking at our walk zones. And so as Superintendent Johnson indicated, we have longstanding IPS board policy that outlines and identifies walk boundaries for each of our schools. And so the team is looking at those prescribed walk boundaries, reviewing and auditing the hazard boundaries designated within those walk boundaries, and looking at how we can reinforce and support those walk zones through strategic deployment of crossing guards. And then finally, route optimization. So route optimization is sort of the behind the scenes work that our transportation team internally does in consultation with our first student partners to look at redesign of routes, to ensure efficiency, looks at consolidation and location of our bus stops, and then pairing opportunities to ensure across our bell times that we're utilizing our buses in the most effective and efficient manner. And you'll see on your screen there that only one of those shifts, it requires specific board action, and that would be the shift related to the extension of the Indigo partnership for high school students in next year. So we'll give a quick overview of some of the Indigo work, so some of the background of the partnership and pilot with Indigo. So there have been many conversations going back decades with respect to opportunities to think about how IPS and Indigo could strategically partner and collaborate to ensure that we're providing a high degree of transportation services to our students and the residents of Indianapolis. So lots of conversation and analysis looking at opportunities to explore what that might look like in the future. Those conversations led to an initial pilot in June of 2018, summer of 2018, that we implemented at 2 high schools, initially at Shortridge and then extended to Arsenal Tech, that just explored the feasibility and tested out how that would impact students and what feedback we got from that. And so had really positive feedback from students and parents that participated in that small pilot. And based on that experience and that feedback we received, we executed a memorandum of understanding with Indigo that extended a universal pilot transit program for school year 2019-20 and the current school year 2020-21 that provided all IPS high school students with an Indigo pass that provided universal access. So if Indigo was running, an IPS student had an opportunity to use that transit network, including weekends, holidays, summer breaks, and spring break, while we also continued to route students on Yellow Bus. So this was a supplement to our existing transit network that was an opportunity to provide enhanced mobility supports to our students and to build on the success of that initial pilot and explore the feasibility of many of our high school students utilizing the Indigo transit network. With respect to the 21-22 school year, we are recommending that students who meet established criteria with respect to ridership transition onto the Indigo transit network for their daily commute to and from schools. And so we've worked closely with Indigo. We've worked closely with our data and analysis team to identify students that are best situated to make that transition in next year based on their residence and their school of attendance that have a ideal ride time to students. And so looking at that data, looking at the Indigo transit network, we identified 3 criteria that we've used to identify those students that would be best supported through the Indigo transit in next school year. And those are students that meet the following criteria. They have a less than a 50-minute total journey time. So that is their walk plus the wait for the bus plus their total ride time of less than 50 minutes. And I would note here that with respect to our Yellow Bus transportation, we try to keep a maximum ride time of 80 minutes on Yellow Bus service. So a significantly less, a shorter total journey time than the IPS transportation guidelines allow. Students that have a less than a 0.7 total walk distance. So from their home to their initial pickup stop, and finally from their destination stop to school, a less than a total walk distance of 0.7 miles. Again, this is aligned to our IPS transportation guidelines with respect to walk to stop distance for our high school students, which is also 0.7 miles. And finally, no transfers. So students that are able to board the Indigo bus at their pickup stop, ride that bus to their destination stop, which is to their school without any transfers. So I'll note for those students that meet that criteria, we believe there are about 600 students for school year 21-22 that meet that 0 transfers, 0.7 total walk distance, and 50-minute total journey time using the Indigo transit network for next year. And based on those students, almost 90% of the students are expected to have a shorter journey time on Indigo than they do on their current yellow bus assignment. So again, we wanted to make sure that, again, we've had 2 years of that pilot program, so over 150,000 journeys of IPS students on Indigo that have really demonstrate sort of a proof of concept in our ability for our students to utilize that. But we want to make sure that in that first year that we're starting to transition students onto Indigo for their daily commute to and from school, that we're really executing on that well and continuing to provide a high degree of service. In addition to the 600 or so students that will shift onto Indigo for school year 21-22, we'll also provide a universal Indigo transit pass to any student who opts into the Indigo partnership. And so again, opting into Indigo and then opting out of IPS yellow bus transportation. So we've done additional analysis that identified student that we still believe can reasonably and reliably use the Indigo network for their primary commute to school, but might have a transfer, have a slightly longer walk up to 1 mile, and have a slightly longer total journey time of up to 60 minutes. Based on those thresholds and criteria, there are about 2,700 students, which are approximately half of all of our IPS high school students that would meet those plausibility criteria. For these students, we'll do some additional and have done some additional outreach into communication. So for those folks that are joining us tonight at the town hall that might have received a letter with respect to Indigo, you'll note that there are 2 sort of target groups. Those students that meet that initial 0.7 50-minute journey time students that we are recommending that we shift onto Indigo next year. And then an additional 21 or so hundred students that we've done some targeted engagement with and asked them to just consider the opting into that Indigo pass based on the criteria that we've used to determine feasibility. So just reviewing in summary why we're proposing this shift for our high school students to Indigo in the following year. One, it's about building on the success of that pilot. So that initial pilot and then the 2 years of that universal transit pilot program, really taking the next step in the planning and implementation of that Indigo partnership. So we've been really pleased with the feedback that we've gotten, the opportunities and the service and quality of our Indigo partners in terms of serving our students' needs and providing those enhanced mobility supports. So we look at this as the next step in that conversation, planning, and discussion. And it's also about thinking about how we can, given the financial and budget context that Superintendent Johnson reviewed, how we can think about how we provide sort of a multimodal transportation service that continues to provide a high quality transportation service to students, but while also minimizing and reducing costs. So both Indigo and IPS are both public taxpayer funded organizations, and we want to be good stewards of taxpayer dollars and think about how we can strategically partner as organizations to continue to provide high quality transportation and also minimize the impact to the taxpayers that support our organizations. As Superintendent Johnson indicated, we continue to have higher per pupil transportation costs than other similarly situated peer districts. And so we reviewed some of those reasons that go into that. But as we think about where we can make strategic investments and cost reductions, transportation was identified as an area where we think we can reduce costs while continuing to provide high degree of service to students, while also minimizing the impact of any cost reductions or budget cuts from the student in classroom learning experience. Obviously, we want to make sure that we're supporting a robust quality education experience for all of our students. And so to the extent that we can minimize the impact of any budget cuts on that experience, we certainly want to do that. And finally, as I indicated earlier, by starting with a smaller cohort of students that will shift for school year 21-22, this allows IPS and Indigo to really focus on making sure that we're executing and implementing that in a way that provides a really high degree of service and is a really positive experience for those students and families. And so I know for many of our students, they've become familiar with Indigo and are experienced riders and have really appreciated the benefits that provides. And for some families who might not have utilized that significantly, this will be a disruption and impact. And so we'll talk a little bit later about some of the planning and supports that we'll do to ensure that this is a smooth transition for students but want to make sure that this is executed in the fall in a way that really is a positive experience for our students and families, and really builds on the success that we've had to date with respect to the IndyGo partnership. I will stop here to introduce a few of our special guests from the IndyGo team that have joined us tonight that will share a little more information with you. So I'm pleased to welcome and introduce Inez Evans, President and CEO of IndyGo, Cheryl Purifoy, IndyGo Deputy Chief Operating Officer, Annette Darrow, Director of Service Planning, Mark Emmons, IndyGo Director of Safety, Security, and Training, and Jordan Patterson, Special Programs Manager.
Thank you, Zach. I appreciate the opportunity. This is Inez Evans, President and CEO of IndyGo, and we are honored that we have been asked to be a part of this presentation tonight. I'm going to turn this over to Jordan Patterson, who will go over our presentation, and then once question and answer time is open, the rest of the team will be available to respond to questions. Jordan, take it away.
Thank you, Ms. Inez. Really glad to be here. My goal this evening is to share with you all tips, tricks, and tools to riding IndyGo and having access not only to the classroom, but beyond. So IndyGo operates 30 fixed routes, including the Red Line throughout Marion County. We are actually the largest transportation provider in the state of Indiana. And currently we operate on what is called a hub and spoke system, with most transfers occurring at the transit center. We look forward to one day rolling out an efficient grid, which will allow easier transfers throughout the entire system. And we are also looking for to expanded service with our Purple Line, and we anticipate breaking construction on that project this year, which will allow for better infrastructure improvements and bus rapid transit on the 38th Street corridor, all the way north on Postal Road, all the way to the Fort Benjamin Harris area. So at IndyGo, our mission is to connect our community to economic and cultural opportunities through safe, reliable, and accessible mobility experiences. And in this example, IPS is our community. And this is a great example of the mission that we have at IndyGo. Through this partnership, all IPS school students can ride all fixed routes during all operation hours, any day of the week. And it's at no additional cost to you and parents. So you never had to reload your card because of that, because there's no additional costs. This graph shows IPS unique riders by month in school. And what this demonstrates is that the program is not just being used by a handful of students at just 1 or 2 schools. We're seeing usage of the program at all of the IPS high schools. And the left shows what we were seeing pre-pandemic, and you can see the effects that the pandemic has had on ridership. But you also see that school usage is proportionate pre-pandemic to where we are right now. Then this next slide shows the number of trips per month by school. And from the program's launch, it was widely popular. We obviously saw a drop in trips during the pandemic, but still the number of trips during the pandemic proves what we knew already about student usage, and that is that trips extend beyond just to the classroom, and that public transportation and having the ability to be mobile and to lead your lives has truly been a lifeline for many students. So now let's talk about the first step to getting to where you're trying to go, and that is planning your trip. We have a trip planner on our website. What you're going to want to know is where you're at and then where you're going. So you're going to want to put that starting location and then your destination into that trip planner. And from there, your trip is automatically populated, and you just follow the directions. And so, like I said, that trip planner is on our main webpage. That's indigo.net/plan your trips. If you would like to look at your individual route, you can visit indigo.net/routes. And I would like to make a note that those routes are available both in English and in Spanish. And then there are also multiple ways to track your bus to help reduce the wait time at your stop. We have the MyStop mobile app, the Transit app. Also, Google Maps is super useful for tracking when the bus is coming in real time. You can also use our Text for Next service if you don't use a smartphone. And then lastly, you're always welcome to call our customer service. They're able to help people in both English and Spanish, and they will help you get to where you're trying to go. All right, so the next part is paying for your trip. Because of the IPS partnership, as I've stated before, this is at no cost to students or parents. And the My Key Card, which is our account-based system, is actually built into your student ID. So you're paying with your student ID. I would like to make a note that how you pay differs from if you're using one of our local routes or whether you're using Bus Rapid Transit. On local routes, validators are on board the bus next to the fare box. And then if you're riding Bus Rapid Transit, you're going to want to validate at the station before entering the bus. The whole purpose of Bus Rapid Transit is to keep it moving. So you're going to want to pay and validate before you enter the bus. And again, I want to reiterate that it's as easy as tapping and going. You just tap your pass or tap your student ID and you get on the bus. Let me see. You're also going to want to keep your card on the validator until the screen says checking your account. Once you see that signal, you're going to take your card away, and then the validator will make a confirmation noise to know, so that you'll know that your payment has been validated. Here are just some general tips for riding the bus. Number one, you're going to want to be visible at your stop. Our bus drivers, our coach operators are trained to stop for two reasons: letting somebody off the bus and if they see somebody at the stop. So you're going to want to arrive at your stop at least 5 to 10 minutes before your bus is scheduled to arrive. When the bus arrives, you're going to then want to allow people to exit the bus first before entering. And then, as we stated on the previous slide, you simply tap your ID card. If you're on a fixed route, if you're on Bus Rapid Transit, then you've already done that. And you can simply find your seat. The bus stops will be announced as you're going on your journey. So you're going to want to listen to where you are on your trip. And once you see that your stop is coming up, you're going to want to pull what is called a court signal to signal to the driver that you're trying to get off. So when you see your stop, you pull that signal and then you head out. All right, let's talk safety and security. So your safety on board is important to us. There are security cameras on the buses at the Carson Transit Center and at all of the Red Line stations. There are also security personnel and Indigo supervisors at the Carson Transit Center. And as it relates to COVID-19 and the pandemic, excuse me, we have taken a number of steps to protect our riders and coach operators during this pandemic. And just a few of the measures that we're currently taking: masks are required. I'll say that again, masks are required. And our operators have the right to refuse service if you are not wearing a mask. So that is something that's super important to us as we're following the guidance of our health officials, both local and the FTA. There are also shields installed on buses that provide a barrier between the operator and riders. And then I'd also like to note that we've increased the frequency of our sanitization and our cleaning. And if you want to know more about what we're doing to safely provide service to riders, feel free to visit indigo.net/health. And then lastly, I'd like to say that, if you are having issues with your student ID, I encourage you to talk to your school's program coordinator. If you have general questions about the program, my email address is on the screen and you can contact me. And we will also be fielding questions during this question and answer portion that's coming up next.
Back to you, Zach. Thank you, Jordan.
Yeah. Thank you, Jordan. Thank you, Ida. And again, we'll answer questions at the end, so continue to put those answers in the chat room, the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen, and we'll make sure to review those and hopefully answer your questions at the end of the presentation. We're going to get into walk zones real quick, but I wanted to flag 2 points for the Indigo that I failed to mention that I'd like to note is, one, as I previously indicated, we've had over 150,000 individual rides by IPS students on Indigo through the duration of that Indigo pilot program. And I did want to note that the significant impact of COVID-19 on our ridership numbers for the current school year. So obviously we were in virtual learning for much of the school year and had significant impact on that. If we just looked at what the ridership in 2019-20 was, I think it was just 115,000 individual rides in that school year. So could pretty confidently say that we probably would have been over 200,000 rides had it not been for the impact of COVID-19, which did decrease rather some of the ridership in the previous school year. And I wanted to note one of the benefits that we think, in addition to sort of the transportation mobility enhancements that I mentioned with respect to after school jobs and weekend and breaks, is one of the benefits that we saw for IPS students riding Indigo is that if they missed an Indigo bus, they may be late for school, but there's going to be another bus coming that they can get on and make sure they're still in school for that day. Unfortunately, the reality with our yellow buses is if a student misses a yellow bus, they're either going to have to walk or have a parent drive them, or they're going to miss that day. And so one of the things that positive feedback we got both from students and school leaders and internally was that benefit of making sure that students could attend school and had that transportation available to them, even if they overslept and missed that bus. So we'll switch gears here before we get into the Q&A and review some of the planning and implementation with respect to walk zones. So as Andrew had previously indicated, IPS has had walk boundaries, walk zones prescribed in board policy dating back to 1998. And so basically the board policy determines which students are eligible to receive IPS Transportation Services. So IPS Transportation Services, the yellow buses that we assign to students, those are provided for students who live outside of the prescribed walk boundaries for their schools. And you can see it outlined in your screen there. Those prescribed boundaries are more than 1 mile for an elementary school, more than 1.25 miles for a middle school, and more than 1.5 miles for a high school. And I would note here that we have many of our schools are K-8 schools, and so those K-8 schools in practice are treated as elementary schools. So for a parent that might have a 7th grader and a 2nd grader at a school, again, we want to make sure that we're treating those students the same and not creating situations where parents are with students in the same school have different transportation modes. So again, K-8 students are in practice treated as elementary school students. So as we indicated, we've had walk boundaries dating back to 1998, and as far back as 1998 through today, we've had many of our students who are walking within those boundaries. So for many students, this has been part of their learning experience is being designated a walker, not being assigned yellow bus. So have had this for many, many years. But what we've seen over the years is a decrease in the level of funding and support for crossing guards. And so as that funding has decreased and some of those crossing guards have been eliminated, we've employed more and more safety busing in lieu of those crossing guards, which has led to a number of students that are living within those prescribed walk boundaries, but are now assigned a yellow bus in lieu of that walker designation. And so one of the challenges that we had last year as we were managing the impact of COVID-19 with respect to trying to minimize the risk of transmission and how to keep students safe both in the classroom and on our school buses, we were really working at how we could implement physical distancing, that social distancing on our buses and in our classrooms. And so the CDC established guidelines, recommendations with respect to school bus transportation that recommended that school districts try to employ a 1 student per seat limit with respect to school buses. So that was obviously a pretty significant challenge for us last year as we were trying to, again, reduce the risk of students while riding our buses and try to make sure that we were getting as close as we could to those CDC recommendations. So among a number of efforts and initiatives that we employed last year to address that, one of them was really looking at that walk zone policy and implementation through strategic deployment of crossing guards. So last year we identified 13 schools that had a significant number of students that were living within the prescribed walk boundaries, but continuing to receive yellow bus service. And we looked at how we could deploy cross guards to support the students walking in those boundaries and reduce some of the ridership of our yellow buses last year. Building on that effort from last year and looking towards the 21-22 school year, we've continued to execute on that walk boundary policy. So looking at and auditing all of our hazard boundaries that are within those walk boundaries. So a hazard boundary could be a high traffic road, it could be a freeway or interstate. Obviously, those would be carved out within a walk boundary. So our team has gone through a process of reviewing and auditing all of those walk hazard boundaries to make sure that those are up to date and accurate. And also looking at where there might be opportunities to continue to expand the number of crossing guards that we deploy at schools within those walk boundaries to support student walkers. And so based on that analysis, we believe there are approximately 2,000 students that could be shifted from yellow buses for the current school year into a walk designation for the school year 21-22. And so this is about the same number of students that we shifted last year based on that initial efforts. And so expecting somewhere between 5,500 and 7,000 students will be walker status for the coming school year. And so we'll continue to work through that as our enrollment process continues and continue to work internally to identify the location and number of crossing guards that we will deploy in the fall to make sure that we're supporting those walk zones appropriately. And finally, we continue to maintain a walk zone exemption request process. So this is to ensure that any student that is designated as a walker, that we've appropriately made that designation. So one, to make sure that designation was appropriately assigned. And so an opportunity for families to request review of that. So on an individual case-by-case basis to make sure that student was appropriately assigned, and to take into consideration if there are any unique physical or health considerations with respect to a student that merit continued assignment of a hazard bus for that student. So we'll continue to maintain that process in appropriate circumstances, allow that our team to review those on a case-by-case basis. In addition to the work that we're doing with respect to crossing guards and reviewing the walk zone exemptions, we're in the process of planning and developing the school level supports to ensure that we can continue to support the students and families that might be impacted by these recommendations for the coming school year. So you'll see on your screen there several of those safety and support measures. So deployment and support for walking school bus programs. So we know that as an IPS parent, a former IPS student and IPS parent, obviously student safety is at the foremost of all of our conversations and planning with respect to these recommendations. So we want to make sure that we're thinking through as a team and getting feedback from students and families about how we can best support schools and students and families as we implement on this. And so we know that students are safer when they walk in groups. And so thinking about how we can help support at the school level development and deployment of walking school bus programs. So this is opportunities where we identify large clusters of students that are living in concentrated areas, across several blocks or within an apartment complex or certain neighborhoods, that we can help connect those families and support them in developing a walking school bus program so those students can conduct their afternoon and morning walks together to support student safety. Working with our schools, working with parents and families to identify infrastructure needs that might limit or create safety barriers for students. So working internally as a team, we identify those and flag those to our partners in the city. This could be pedestrian supports, crosswalks, lighting, infrastructure. So areas of need that we know that might limit or reduce the routes that are available to our students, identifying those, and to the extent possible, working with the city to identify those and see if there are any opportunities for us to mitigate those. There aren't always, and so we know that different neighborhoods have different pedestrian and walkability features, and so we certainly want to take that into account, but to the extent possible, identify those and have conversations with the city about opportunities to mitigate those. And then finally, again, thinking about, with respect to our crossing guards, how we can place those most strategically to help support and provide an additional level of safety and security for the students that are impacted in those walk zones. I think this is where I turn it back over to Andrew, who will wrap things up and walk through some of our timeline and next steps.
All right, thank you, Zach and team. So just a few timeline-oriented comments here and next steps. So as you can see with the table that is on the slide, we're kind of backtracking a little bit. In March, we presented to the IPS board with recommendations for some of these shifts in the next month to provide detailed information to schools and impacted families regarding the impact of the proposed transportation shifts. And then at the end of April is when we will go back to the IPS board for formal action. And then as we think about May, June, July, and August, that's really where we start to focus on development of a detailed implementation plan, which will include community engagement, district supports, and safety and planning, and ongoing communication and community engagement. So that'll happen over the next number of months as we head into next school year. Zach mentioned a few of these items already, as did the Indigo team, but there are a number of ways that we will ensure we are supporting you over the next couple of months. The first is impacted families have already received communications. I think that's a big reason why you're with us this evening, outlining the proposed changes and how you can learn more. We do have everything updated on the website that is at myips.org. If you go to students and families in transportation, the information you are hearing this evening, as well as FAQs and a number of other items are on the website and will be updated frequently. We are holding not only this town hall, but 2 additional town halls this week so that we can make sure that that multiple community members and families have an opportunity to learn more. There will be a student information session for high school students that we are planning as we navigate the potential transition to Indigo. And then this is something that we executed when we transitioned to the Indigo pilot, and that was Indigo summer sponsored ride opportunities for impacted students and families. So that will be at no cost. Just kind of learn the ropes of riding Indigo if that is something that it would be new for you. And then of course, we're continuing to develop additional supports for impacted students in schools. There is also, and I'll mention this again before we sign off, but there is a feedback form that is on the My IPS website under the transportation button, where you can list out additional supports as we continue to think through this and plan. We'd definitely like to continue to hear from you. And so just kind of wrapping all this up into key takeaways as we think about 21-22 school year. As Superintendent Johnson mentioned, we do have a commitment to ensuring financial sustainability of our organization. And so we are recommending initiatives for implementation for the 21-22 school year to help address those, but really making sure we're prioritizing decisions that do not impact the classroom and teaching and learning. That definitely does not mean that these decisions are easy. And so we appreciate you being with us this evening and helping us through these conversations and ensuring that we are thinking about the right things as we do think about this transition. And so now I'll transition over to some Q&A. Again, I'm going to start with some questions that had already come up online in the feedback form, and then I'll start to track some trending questions that you can, if you have not already, you can put those in the Q&A feature in Zoom. And so I'll start turning it back over to some of our panelists this evening, but we're actually going to, since we have the Indigo team with us, we're going to focus mainly on Indigo and actually start with a question that has come up often, and I know Jordan spoke to this a little bit, but it's actually a two-part question and it hones in on student and family safety. So I'll go to Zach first, which is who is responsible for the student safety? And then I think more generally, Jordan, as we have obviously a number of parents and community members, I'm a parent myself, more generally how Indigo does support a safe customer riding experience. So I might have you just touch on that again as well. So Zach, who is responsible for the student safety while riding Indigo?
Thank you, Andrew. I'll just note with respect to, again, I've said it again and I'll repeat it, that again, we've had 150,000 rides with IPS students on Indigo, and really positive experience for that, and with largely uneventfully, thankfully, with respect to any safety incidents. So have a large data set that gives us confidence that our students can ride Indigo safely and reliably. With respect to student safety, obviously student safety is a key concern for us with respect to walking to the bus stops, waiting on the bus stops, and riding Indigo. And so I'll let Jordan speak specifically about the on the bus riding experience, but obviously with respect to walking to the Indigo stop and waiting on the stop, primarily the safety concern lies with the student families to think about how they're navigating that and being conscious of their surroundings. And you know, we know that neighborhoods vary with respect to the infrastructure and other factors, but unfortunately with respect to that safety, it's the same safety concern that a student riding the yellow bus would have with respect to walking to their yellow bus stop and waiting at that stop. And so primarily it's about helping communicate any issues that might arise with respect to either the neighborhood or the stop, and communicating that to the parent, to our IPS transportation team, to their school FACE liaison or school leader, so that we can be aware of that and address that as necessary. But then I'll turn it over to Jordan with respect to that safety with respect to riding Indigo.
Yeah, I'm actually going to pass it on to Mark Emmons, who's over safety and security at Indigo, to kind of address this beyond what I've discussed in the presentation.
All right, thank you, Jordan. I'm Mark Emmons. I'm the Director of Life Safety, Security, and Training for Indigo. To piggyback off what Zach said, before you get to the Indigo bus, it is true that it will be left up to the student and their families to make sure that they get to the bus safely. As he said, it would be the same as if you were riding the yellow bus, which a lot of us did when we were children and we had to walk to our bus stop. The good thing is Indigo, once you get on the bus, please feel safe in knowing that you'll be riding one of the nation's safest transportation companies. Indigo, in respect to its peers, has a very low safety incident count, and Indigo does train its operators on policies and procedures to help take care of any incidents that may arise while your student is riding the bus. So, for example, if there happened to be an issue involving one of the students that they felt that they would not be able to de-escalate themselves, they are trained to call into the dispatch center and request IMPD, and then IMPD will be dispatched to the bus. And also mentioned, we do have off-duty law enforcement officers, be it IMPD or the surrounding counties, that actually are out on our routes in their marked vehicles and can respond whenever they are requested to respond. So I feel that Indigo has been doing a great job on this, and we will continue that even with the increase in student riders. Great,
thank you, Jordan and Mark. And I think we'll stay with Indigo here. What Jordan, what does Indigo provide in terms of language services for families as they navigate the experience of writing Indigo?
Yeah, so I mentioned the trip planning process earlier during the presentation. You should know that our website is able, like you're able to translate that into Spanish. Our customer service also has the capacity to have those Spanish conversations, and also the material that we print as far as routes are concerned, it's available in both English and Spanish.
Great, thanks, Jordan. And then I think from an IPS perspective, Zach, how is the district accommodating ESL students for both the walk zones and Indigo?
Obviously, as we indicated at the start of this presentation, any of the materials or supports with respect to information and communications with respect to the planning and supports for this will be provided in Spanish with specific outreach and supports to make sure that we're connecting with those families. And then continuing with our information sessions at the schools, making sure that we're providing additional contacts and supports with those families to make sure that they're aware of and informed with the recommendations and connected in with some of the safety and support planning that we'll do over the coming months.
And I also like to add in regards to like requests for information beyond just Spanish, but any sort of special accommodations, Indigo can handle that. All you would need to do is just contact our customer service and whatever information you're trying to request, whether it be Spanish or something else, we're able to provide that.
Great, thank you, Jordan. Next question is for Superintendent Johnson. Why is IPS removing the Indigo pass from students who will use yellow bus service? Some students have relied on the pass over the past 2 to 3 years.
That's a great question, and one we thought a lot about. Because we are trying to, be responsible with our resources and our financial resources after having done the pilot, and now we're going to shift a group of students to be Indigo as their primary mode of transportation. We can't continue to offer both of those services to all of our students. And so this is a pivot point where some students will have Indigo as their sole and primary mode of transportation to and from school. The district will still obviously take care of that cost. And then if there are students who had that pass before, they want to continue to use it, they will be able to opt in for Indigo, but that would mean that they're making the decision to no longer have yellow bus and to again use Indigo as their primary transportation mode. So it is available still to all students, but it will require that trade-off of yellow bus service or the Indigo pass access. And again, that's to ensure that we're just being as responsible as we need to be with those financial resources that we have.
Thank you, Superintendent Johnson. Staying along those lines, Zach, is there any exemption or process to appeal being transitioned onto Indigo?
For the students that we've identified that have that plausibility, right, of the 0 transfers, 0.7 walk, and the no more than a 50-minute ride time. So we'll continue to support and do some information sessions and help those students work through that process and make sure that they're comfortable and familiar with the Indigo, but there isn't a specific opt-out for those students. I would note that, and should have noted that, for students for whom transportation services are required either because of McKinney-Vento status or because of a special education designation, those students will continue to be provided yellow bus services as required.
Great, thank you, Zach. And then a trending question that we're getting in the Q&A, and this one's for Jordan and Indigo. Will additional bus stops with covering be added to ensure students are protected from inclement weather?
Yeah, I'll actually pass that one along to Annette Darrow. Annette, can you address that?
Sure. As Zach had said, the infrastructure in the community is a challenge for all of us. And so they may be fine at the schools and there are bus stops and neighborhoods that I think if people have questions about, we'd be glad to take a look at them on a case-by-case basis, as we have a team that works on our bus stops and evaluates them and, for improvement and proper placement. So if you would email your bus stop location, there's a 5-digit ID on the stops. If that's something that you could get, or even the intersection, and send that into us, our team would be happy to take a look at the individual stops. We have over 2,900 of them, so that's quite a lot of locations to manage and take care of. So we'd be glad to take a look at those.
And I would just flag on that obviously, as a parent or as an Indigo rider, that, certainly want to think about how that students would be impacted in inclement weather. But I would note that our yellow bus stops, we don't have any covered stops for our yellow bus. So, that is a concern, and rightfully, and I appreciate the question, but that's a question that we deal with respect to our students on our yellow bus stops as well. And I'll note that some of the Indigo stops, particularly the high volume, high service stops that might support some of our high school students. I'll note those students who might be utilizing the red line have some, in terms of the amenities and supports at those stops, would be far in excess of what we provide for many of our yellow bus stops, all of our yellow bus stops.
Great, thank you, Zach and team, and want to be very mindful of time here as we will look to end at 7. So I want to transition to walk zones, as we are getting a few trending questions there. So Zach, we'll stick with you. As it relates to walk zones, what if I have an issue with the safety of the walk zone route area?
First and foremost, you should always let your peace liaison or the school leader at your school know of any immediate safety concerns. So, well, backing up, if there's an immediate safety concern that's urgent, obviously call 911. To the extent it's not an emergency situation, but just a concern with respect to the route or safety, immediately contact your FACE liaison or school leader so that the school team is made aware of an issue that is a cause of concern. They will communicate that to our transportation team so that we're made aware of it and can review it, and to the extent possible mitigate if necessary. And then finally, if there are just long-standing issues with respect to safety, that's what that walk zone exemption process is for. So we want to make sure that obviously our team is evaluating walk zones, looking at hazard barriers, examining the streetscape and infrastructure that supports those neighborhoods. But to the extent there are changes or emergent things that come up, we want to be made aware of that as soon as possible. So having that communicated, and then again, if there are issues that can't be resolved, to use that exemption request process so that we can review those on a case-by-case basis, and where appropriate, provide and assign a hazard bus if necessary.
Great, thank you, Zach. And then one additional trending question for walk zones here. What if I live in a neighborhood that doesn't have sidewalks?
So our transportation team looks at the walk boundaries for schools and makes determinations about whether or not there is a safe route to school supported by pedestrian traffic. So unfortunately, we've had conversations with the city. The city has something like 85,000 miles of roads and like 30,000 miles of sidewalks. And so we know there are lots of underserved areas with respect to some of the pedestrian supports that exist. And so there may not be a sidewalk to support every single walk route. What we look at, is there a pedestrian supported safe route to school for a student based within that walk boundary? So it may mean having to, go a block over or so forth. So it's kind of identifying, does that student, based on their residence and based on their school of enrollment, have what we determine is a safe route to school?
Great, thanks, Zach. And again, being mindful of time, those are some trending questions that have come up. If you did put a question in or still thinking about putting a question in the Q&A, please do so, as we will see those on the back end, and that will be helpful enough for us as we continue to plan. So do just want to thank you for joining us tonight. To review these proposals with even more depth, go to our transportation page on our website at www.indigo.gov. www.myips.org. You will also find a feedback form there to share your thoughts about the proposals and any new questions that may come up. We've also created an FAQ that will consistently update with trending questions that we get. I want to give a special thanks to our partners in Indigo and Ms. Evans and her team for joining us this evening. I will turn it over to Superintendent Johnson to share closing thoughts for this evening.
Great. So again, I just want to echo Andrew's thanks and gratitude to you all for being with us this evening to learn more, and to the Indigo team for joining us as well. The reality is this is, for a number of our families, a change and a shift. And so it's not lost on me or anyone on the team that whenever you're having to navigate changes and shifts, there are going to be lots of questions that come up, and trying to figure out, okay, how do we accommodate and adjust our current reality to get ready for something that's going to change. And so I appreciate, folks jumping on to learn more and to start thinking about that question. Our goal, our intent, and our commitment is to be sure that as a school district, we are coming alongside and answering those questions, creating those structures for support for our students and for our families, so that as the adjustments and those changes happen, that your school team, your district team, the Indigo team are people who are here to be sure that the transition is a smooth one, a safe one, a positive one for our kids and for our families. So that is absolutely the goal and the commitment that we are making as we, again, navigate some of the transitions that are upcoming. So appreciate that time. Again, please be sure to visit the transportation page. There will be the FAQ document that'll continue to be updated. Obviously, your school team, your FACE liaison, perfectly willing and able to take questions, as is the district team. So feel free to continue to reach out to those folks with any follow-up questions you have. We will continue to engage and have opportunities for further conversation and, again, supports as these transitions are happening for your student and for your family. Thanks so much and have a good evening.